Today's daf is daf Zion. We're going to start on daf Vav Amid Beis, approximately 15 lines up before the end of the daf. Omer Rab Yehuda Merav, Habodek Tzorech Shivatel. It's not sufficient that one checks his house for chametz. He needs additionally a declaration of bittul. Kol chametz sheyesh li b'bayis zeh yehei kimavutal. The Gemara says, my time. Why isn't bedika enough? After all, you're checking every corner of your house. You're getting rid of all your chametz. What could be better than that? If you're saying that there are certain small crumbs that he might miss during his bedika, that's only human. Halo chashivi. We don't have to declare an official bittul because these pirurim are batel me'alehem. They're immediately considered nothing because no one gives any chshivas to small crumbs. And maybe you'll argue that since he's watching and locking his house, and now inside his house he's locking up these perurim, so that gives it a certain chashivus, and it's not batel. So the Gemara says that's not true. Why? For Tanya, we have a brayso that says in the Masechta Maasros, Perek Gimel, Sofei te'enim, v'u'mishamer pnei anovim, Sofei anovim, u'mishamer sadeu, mipnei mikshos, u'mipnei midlos. He's got these unripened figs that are left over after he harvests his figs. They'll never ripen and mature on the tree. It has no chashivas at all. However, he has a security system around his sada. But the reason why he's doing so is because he has very beautiful grapes that are growing in his field. He's not at all interested in the te'enim. Or another example that the Tosefta gives is Sofei Anovim. He's got grapes that'll never mature. And even after the harvest, the batzir, he left over these Sofei Anovim. But he's Meshamer Sadeh. No one can get access to it because he's locked up his field on all sides because of Mikshos and Nebedlos. He's got beautiful cucumbers and gourds and so forth. It's Bisman Shabal Bais Makbid Aleim Asur Mishum Gezel. If regard to these Sofei Te'edim and Sofei Anovim, the Baal Bais has some use for them, even though they'll never mature, then you're not allowed to steal them. And therefore they're Chai B'Maisa because the Chiyuv Maisa depends upon the ownership that you have, and it's not hefker because you're makbid aleim. But bisman shein Baal Bais makbid aleim, if I assume, and I have reason to believe that the Baal Bais couldn't care less about these Sofei Te'edim and Sofei Anovim because they're never going to ripen, then mutar mishum gezel p'tur min ha'maseh, despite the fact that he is guarding his field, and indirectly he's also guarding the Sofei Te'edim, Sofei Anovim, doesn't make it his. They're still batel and they're still hefker. Hefker is p'tur min ha'maseh. So therefore, we have to understand once again why Rav says that Abodik Tzorech Shivatel, perhaps we're all human. He thought he did an adequate, thorough job in Bedika, but in fact he missed a beautiful piece of bread. And Daite Luye, he's going to think, you know what? I don't want to get rid of this piece of bread. Rashi says, he doesn't want to burn this piece of bread, and he delays a little bit. And while he dilly-dallies, he owns the chametz, and he violates by Yerah by Motzei. And therefore, if he does bittul, then even if he hesitates for that moment to destroy the chametz, it doesn't matter. It's not his chametz. He was already mevatel the chametz. So Gemara asks, maybe it should be enough to say that, you know what, let him make bittul when he finds it. Why does he have to make bittul on the night of the 14th, meaning the day of the 14th, after his bedika? And the Gemara answers, maybe he'll find this kuskiyafa after Shas Isur Chametz, and at that point the chametz is ready, not in his rishus. The Torah took it out of his rishus. It's also about no, he can't benefit from it, and therefore it's not his. He can't be mevatel. So best that we chap that the bittul should take place before the Shas Isuro. Otherwise, lo motzi mevatel. The Amar Abelazar shnei dvar meinu b'shus shel adam. V'asana kosu kilein b'shus of elein bar b'shus aram v'chametz b'shei shal sulamala. There are two categories of objects which technically are not yours, but the Torah gives you responsibility for them. One is if you dig a bar in Rishus Harabim, you don't own that property. The bar is not yours, but the Torah makes it yours as far as Nizkei Mama and Hamazik is concerned. Somebody falls into the bar, you'll have to pay for that. And Chametz, after Shei Shal Sulmal, I mean, at the end of the 6th hour, the Torah says that the Chametz is also by no, it's not your Rishus. Therefore, technically, it's not yours, but yet you violate by your Motzei. The Torah makes it as if it was yours to force you to be Mavatal the Chametz. Gemara asks, V'nivatle bi arba, v'nivatle b'chamesh. Why did the Chacham have to make this takana that as early as his bedika, which is the night going into the 14th, he should recite bittul? Why not wait till the 4th hour of the morning, the 5th hour of the morning, and it's still in his rishus? He can still make bittul. What's the rush to make bittul at the night of the 14th? The Gemara answers, Kaven to lavzman isurahu, lavzman bi'urahu, dilma pasha v'lo mavat. We need a time that will remind him, hey, I have to do bittul. So if he's doing the bedika and he's already involved in destroying the chametz, then we can assume that he will likewise remember to do bittul. But to tell him at the 4th hour, the 5th hour on Erev Yontif he should do bittul, lavadaite, it's not in his mindset. And here we start the daf for today, daf Zayin Amud Aleph. The Gemara asks, why not have him being mevatel the chametz at the beginning of the 6th hour? That's when we're busy burning the chametz. The bedika we did the night before, the burning of the chametz we do at the beginning of the 6th hour. And we have no suspicion, we're not afraid that he might forget to do the bittul, because while he's doing the treif, he'll certainly do bittul. And in fact, our minig is to do a second bittul at the time of the treifa. The Gemara answers, Kevan, the Isura de Rabbanani Luye, Kidoraisa Dam Yivalav Rishusei Kaimel of Matzu Levatel. The Gemara is Machadesh that this halacha, that once the Shas Isur sets in, it's not yours, this chametz, therefore you cannot be Mavatel the chametz. That applies even to Shas Isur de Rabbanan. So when we get to the beginning of the 6th hour, which the Rabbanan said, according to all Tanoim, whether it's Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, later on in Daf Yud Aleph, that at that point chametz is also mirabbanan, minimum 1 hour before the Shas Isur d'Oraisa. At that point, chametz is no longer in your rishus. The Rabbanan prohibited it, and bittul is out of the question. The Amar of Gidol, Amar of Chia Bar Yosef, Amar Rav, I'm going to give you an illustration of a ruling that's predicated on this principle that once the Rabbanan asks something, it's not yours. Because in the name of Rav, Hamakadesh, a man gives chametz on Erev Pesach to a woman for Kiddushin, mi Shei Shal Salmal, from the beginning of the 6th hour, and afilu bechite kordenaisa, even it's not real chametz, but it's chametz nukcha, it's hard, tough chametz that grows in Hare Arat, and if water fell on these grains, then it creates a chametz nukcha. It's ein choshen l'kedushin. It's not even a chashash kedushin. We don't have to worry about the possibility of kedushin, because since the Rabbanan asked it, it's now considered out of your rishus, and therefore you cannot be makadosh and ishu. The Gemara asks, is it really true that once the Shas Isur sets in, then the chametz is out of your possession? It's also bano, and you cannot be mevatel v'tanya. What are you going to say about the following brisa? A person is sitting in the base medrash, and nizkar sheyesh lo chametz b'sof beiso. Oh no, he reminds himself there's chametz in his house, and he didn't destroy the chametz. Is hareza mevatlo belibo? All he has to do is be mevatel it. Echad b'Shabbos, v'echad b'Yontif. So the Gemara says, what does it mean that the Brisa says whether it's Shabbos or it's Yontif, meaning whether it's Shabbos or Pesach? The Gemara says the following: Bishleim, I understand how he could be mevatel it on Shabbos. If Shabbos coincides with the 14th of Nisan, then he could be mevatel it on Shabbos morning before the Shas Yisura, before Shat Shishis. El b'Yontif, but he's going to be mevatel it on Pesach itself. Is Basar Isura, who it's after Shas Yisura, and we just finished establishing that bittul is ineffective after the Shas Yisura. So what do we do with this brisa? Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Hacha b'Talmud HaYoshev L'fnei Rabba Eskina v'Nizkar sheyesh lo isum v'gugel sof beiso u'misyar Yishem etachmitz. The case is not where the Talmud reminds himself that he has a fully baked piece of chametz in his rishus, but rather he has an isa megulgeles. He's got a dough that's already been kneaded and it's already ready to become chametz, and now he's afraid that it'll become chametz, and he's not able to get home. He's sitting in front of his Rebbe. That's not a good time to say, Rebbe, I'm sorry, I got to go. And therefore, although he could have, if he would have been free, gone home, rushed and baked it, but he doesn't have that opportunity. He's therefore kadim umevatale mikami detachmas. He's allowed to be mevatalit, and the bitter will be chal before it becomes chametz. Because again, once it becomes chametz, it's out of his rishus, and it's impossible to be mevatalit. But if he's mevatel before it gets to become chametz, it doesn't ferment, then it's fine. The Gemara wants to see if we can find some sort of a support for this in a meticulous reading of the Brisa. Dekanami, I'm going to prove it to you if we read the Brisa carefully. We're talking about an Isa Megulgeles. It's not yet Chametz. Dekatani, it says, Yoshe Visoch Beis HaMedrash. It means that the reason why he can't go home is because he's stuck, Kvod Rabo, in the Beis Medrash. He can't drop his Rebbe who's teaching him. If he wasn't sitting in front of Rabbo, then we would not allow him to be mamatel the chametz. We would have to tell him to go back to his house. Now, if the chametz is fully baked and it's real chametz, then why are we telling him to go back to his house? Imidubar beisa shekvar chmitza, and if efshal levatel afli achas mani suro, so why does the Bryce have to tell me Yoshev the Beis HaMedrash? Even if it's a person at home and he realizes he's got chametz, then if it's after Shas Yisuro and you're claiming that he could be mevatalit, then the same thing should be applied. He could be mevatalit even though it's also on Yontif, and on Yontif he can't be mevared, he can't destroy it. So Shmami, no, we must be talking about a case of an isa of a dough that's not yet chametz, and therefore, if he had not been in the Beis Medrash learning with his Rebbe and the opportunity to go home and bake it on Yontif, that's exactly what we would have told him to do. But in a case where he's Yoshev Bifnei Rabbo in the Beis HaMedrash and he doesn't have the opportunity to go home and bake it and it's threatening to become chametz, then we're going to allow him to effectuate a bittul which is valid because it's not yet chametz. Omar Rav Bar Huna Omar Rav HaPas She'ifcha Kevin She'Rav So Matzah Muteres. If you have a loaf of bread and it's inside a teva, it's inside a box, and right now the Gemara understands Rav to mean that they use this box frequently for matzah and they used it frequently for chametz, and now he doesn't know whether this piece is chametz or matzah. Then Rav some matzah, if most of the time he uses the majority of the usages is matzah, then we can assume it's matzah. The Gemara analyzes this ruling of Rav. What's the case? He knows the chametz, that it's chametz. So what's ki Rav some matzah ma'havi? What good is it if most of the use of this teva is for the sake of matzah? He knows it's chametz. Ella, by process of elimination, it has to be the lo yadin, and we cannot identify it. But when we look at it, chametz, is it chametz? Matzah, or maybe it's chatz. The tzura doesn't give us a heker that this is either matzah or chametz. It's ifsha. It's already beginning to spoil and to get old, and you can't tell whether it's chametz or matzah. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. My area ki rav some matzah. Why do you have to tell me that most of the use of this teva was matzah? I would argue that I feel like you love some matzah, even if he doesn't use this more often for matzah than he does for chametz. Nami nasal basa basra. In a case of 50-50, we don't know if most of the bread is chametz in this box, most is matzah, then we should look at the last time he put something in the box. That's called the azlinan basa basra. And it means that if the last time he put matzah there, we can assume that this pas that now became spoiled, it's mupeshes, must be matzah. And now the Gemara is going to prove that if you have a teva and you don't know what is the identity of one particular object that's in the teva, you'd go basar basar. It depends what was used last. And this is a Mishnah in the seventh parak of Masechta Shkolim. What does it say in the Mishnah in Shkolim? Moshe nimtzu lifnei sochrei behema. We're talking about animal sellers that have stalls. They're in Yerushalayim. The people are mafresh maser sheni from all over the country. They come with the mos, with the money, the coins. They were podeh the maser sheni onto mos. They bring after the chilul and the pigeon of maser sheni. They bring the mos to Yerushalayim, and they buy animals and they shech the animals, or some of them maybe they'll bring as a korban. And now you find coins in front of the mochrei behemos b'shuk. We're out there in the marketplace. There are sellers, and we find coins. What's the status of those coins? Do we have a right to assume that those coins are coins of chulin, meaning these are the coins that are in the pocketbook or fell out of the pocketbook of the mochrim, they're chulin, or shall we assume that these are most meiser sheni? And then nafkamina is awesome, because then you have to be noig with all the restrictions of kedushas maser sheni. So the Mishnah establishes li olam maser. We assume that most of the animals that are being sold in Yerushalayim are being sold for maser sheni money, and therefore, when we find mos in the shuk, most of the mos are maser sheni, shuk again of the hemos, and therefore, whenever I find these mos, I have to assume they're maser sheni mos. But b'harabayis, if on the other hand I find it somewhere in the harabayis outside of the proximity of the mochrei behemos, is chulin, then I have a right to assume it came from the rov. Most of the mos that are in Yerushalayim are chulin mos, and this applies even during the shas haregel, even during the festivals when people come to Yerushalayim for aliyah regel, and they bring with them their meiser sheni money. Nevertheless, it's possible that these mos were there from before the regel, and therefore we assume, based on rov, that they are mos chulin. B'Yerushalayim, if he doesn't find these mos on the Harabais, but in one of the various districts in Yerushalayim outside the Harabais, then it all depends. B'shas haregel, if during the yontif periods he finds these mos is meiser sheni, we assume that these were mos that fell from the Oli regel, that were bringing their meiser sheni mos to Yerushalayim. But b'shai mos hashana, the balance of the year, then they're bechezkas chulin, because most of the mos that are being held by the people of the city of Yerushalayim are chulin. The Amar of Shmaya bar Zera, my timer. What's the reason that during the regel we assume that these are mos meiser, if after all the whole year round we say that most of the mos are chulin? The answer is hol v'shuk Yerushalayim asuyim liskabi b'chol yom. The custom was, because of the covet and the yofi of Yerushalayim, that they used to sweep up the streets on a daily basis. So the old mos from before the period of regel were already swept away, and any mos that I find now are the basra mos. They are the most recent mos that were brought by the Oli regel, and we assume that these are mos meiser sheni. Alma, what do we see from this? Amrinon kamoy azlule, that the original mos that were there are completely gone. They're not to be found in the Shuk Yerushalayim. We've cleaned them up, and therefore we cannot rely on the rov that would normally apply to mos in Yerushalayim and assume they're chulin. But vahani, these mos that I find now, achrinin, these are different mos, because these were the mos that were brought by the Oli Yerushalayim, the original mos that are dropped in the streets of Yerushalayim the whole year round, which are chulin, those are gone. And then we look at the basra. Is hachanami nema here too with regard to this loaf of bread, and you don't know how to identify it? Assume the kama ozil, the original kikros of lechem, of chavetz, were removed. And what I'm looking at now is something that was put into the box most recently. And if most recently it was used for matzah, then who cares if the whole year round it's used for chametz? It's getting close to yontiv. And what would you put in this teva at this close proximity to yontiv? You'd only put matzah. So what we're saying is, why does Rav say that the reason why we're going to be matir this unidentified pasha ipcha in the teva is only because of ribsa matzah, which means that the whole year round I designate this teva primarily for matzah. Forget about that. Let's assume I designate it for chametz, but nevertheless, the last period of time, most recently the Basra, I was putting matzah there. That should be enough to be matzah. Gemara answers, Shani hachadi pucha mochiach alei. Since it's very spoiled, that seems to be an indication that it was there for a long time. It wouldn't have spoiled unless certain conditions, as we'll see, applied. But in general, we would say it wouldn't have spoiled so quickly over the last very short period of time when he started putting matzah in the teva. This is an alta piece of bright. This is from an earlier chapter in history, and it's a pasha ipsha, and we have to go basarov. What does he usually, during the course of the year, put into this teva? Mar rejects this. If you're telling me that the very fact it's a very old pas, is that itself indicates that it's from the whole year round? If so, what do I care if most of the use of this teva is designated for matzah? The fact that it's ipsha means it was placed there a long, long time ago. And a long time ago, way before Pesach, they were only putting chametz in there. They weren't putting in matzah there. So Gemara says, Amar Rabba, lo tema, sheravsa matzah. We have to sort of reinterpret the brisa, or shall I say the ruling, in the name of Rav. Not ravsa matzah, that what they put in this teva is mostly matzah. Ema sherabu yemei matzah iluye, meaning a whole slew, a series of days have passed by since the time period when they started putting matzah into this teva, and that period of time that has elapsed until you finally found this unidentified flying object was such that the ipush could have been an ipush of matzah. So the fact that it's very spoiled doesn't prove that it comes from the whole year round when it was chametz. After all, most recently he's been using it for matzah, and Rav accepts this principle of Hazlina Basa Basra. Lo tzricha. Why did Rav need to teach me that the pas is mutter if Rav sa matzah? The ipusha meruba. Okay, fine. There's a lot of ipush. Malditem, I would say, came in the ipusha meruba. This is not normal ipush. That would happen within a week, but it's very serious, heavy ipush that takes a long period of time to develop. Is he gloy milks I would think that as a result of the siman, this fact that it's ipusha meruba, that proves that this is real chametz that was left there way before Pesach. And therefore, it's not enough to say that in the last couple of days he's been using it for matzah. No. That would be in a normal ipush. But in a case of ipusha meruba, there we would assume that it came from much, much earlier. Kamashman Rav wants to tell, we came into Rabbi Yemei Matzah Iluye, that we're going to take two factors into consideration, weigh them on the scale. On the one hand, it's ribui ipush. On the other hand, it's ribui yamim. There are a lot of days since the beginning of the Pesach period that have passed by. Is there, Famrina, we're going to say, Kol yama v'yamanara nama chamima afa. They bake on a daily basis, and it's hot, warm loaves of bread that go into this teva. Shada iluye, and they put this the hot matzah or whatever it is that came out of the oven on top of what really is matzah, the avshetfe. And the heat is what accelerates the process of ibush. Is it really true that we forget about the rove in favor of the basra? What was the use more recently? Varsanya, we have a brayso that says Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Omer Teva Shenishtam Chuba Mos Chulin Mos Maser. If you have a box and you use it for multiple purposes, you use it for storage for Mos Chulin and for Mos Maser Sheni. In Rov Chulin, in Rov Maser. What do you majority do with this teva, with this this storage place? We're not going to ask, well, what was the last use, but rather we're going to look at the Rov. Vamai, I don't understand this Brisa Rabbi Yossi, Lezel Basa Basra. Who cares what he generally puts into the teva? Let's look at the last use of the teva. Let's assume that any most that he put originally in earlier time periods, they were already cleaned out. And then we should go Basa Basra. It seems from Rabbi Yossi and its Brisa that lo azlinan Basa Basra. And that's against the Mishnah that we brought from Shkolim. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Mayaskira Kagon Shenishtamshu Ba Mos Chulin Mos Meiser Fi Ein Yodei Zmehem Biso. There is no Basra because he doesn't know what was the last usage of this teva, and therefore we go Basra Ro. Rav Zvid Amar Kagon Shenishtamshu Ba B'Tziburin Tziburin. In other words, he uses this teva, sometimes bitziburin, meaning of mos chulin, and sometimes tziburin means piles of mos meiser sheni. He usually puts the meiser sheni in one corner of the teva, and he puts piles of meiser chulin in another part of the teva. So we never really know which are the rishonos and which are the achronos, because he's got tziburin. Rav Papa Amar kigon dishtakach beguma. Let's say you found these mows and you don't know the status of the mows in a guma. You know, the teva doesn't have a flat bottom to it; it has crevices, and he found it in a crevice. But now we have no way of knowing that this was one of the Basra mows, because who says it was Achron? Maybe it was there for a long period of time before the Basra, because it was hidden in this guma, and therefore we cannot use and operate with Basra. So we're going to use instead what we call rove. It's Hashem will continue on Daf Zayin Amid Beis in the next year.